Hello, everybody. My brain is working very slowly today. As you can hear, I have a terrible cold. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to be as fluent and as lively as I usually am, I don't think. And I hope my voice holds out. Very lucky to have with me today for practical and emotional purposes, given my poor state of health. Karen over in Shanghai, and Susan over in America, somewhere in the depths of Virginia, I think. And unfortunately, Rani Rothwell from Australia couldn't be with us. She has got terrible power cuts over in Brisbane at the moment, and so her internet has gone. High winds and storms in Brisbane. So at the last minute, I've asked Rebecca Jackson to step in with about an hour's notice. So thank you for all three for coming, but also especially to Rebecca, who's on a wing and a prayer. Well, like we always are in play work, really, I guess. This is a fabulous experience for us. We are from the playwork field, or at least some of us are. Some of us come from different perspectives to this PARS playwork approach. And so we're really outsiders to this whole idea of alternative, democratic, progressive education. I don't even know what the correct terminology is. I'm so sorry. I don't want to offend anybody. And what's brought us here is this idea of childhood and the commonalities between some of the approaches that Summerhill has, or many of the approaches that Summerhill takes to this idea of childhood, this notion of childhood, and our approach to childhood. Because although in playwork our outcomes are not educationally focused, our aims are very much based in the sorts of ideas that you've been discussing over the last couple of days. And I was so cross yesterday because actually I was sitting in on the sessions, but I was sitting in my bed with my cold medicine and there were so many fascinating discussions going on. And I thought, oh, I just want to say this, or, oh, that reminds me of, and I couldn't join in. So I'm very frustrated that I've missed some really interesting discussions, but I have been here and listening intently. I wrote a blog about some of those commonalities in the philosophy of childhood and how we as PARS playworkers and Summerhill approaches this idea of childhood. And that was very based in A.S. Neill's ideas and theories. But actually, from listening to the conference yesterday, it struck me that actually there were so many other commonalities. So in the playwork field, we've been moaning for 70 years that nobody understands us. And that was a theme that came out yesterday. How do we get other people to see things our way? How do we get across our ideas? And that's something that we've very much been interested in and struggling with, to be honest with you, in the playwork field for the last 70 years. Other issues came up, money. Oh gosh, that's a bone of contention in playwork. How do we use it? There's never enough of it. How do we get value for our work and funding? Lack of organisations to take this forward. And I know Henry and Summerhill are doing some wonderful work around that. But again, in the playwork field, we really haven't had a representative body that sustained us through all the comings and goings of various legislation and regulation requirements. And we've suffered for that over several years. So many commonalities. And I think one of the workshops we might end up doing in the field next year when we all get together properly is around the similarities and how different approaches and common approaches to organising and professionalising and perhaps sharing some of the barriers that we face. That would be a fascinating discussion. Anyway, I mustn't ramble on. I am basically I would see myself as a playwork historian. Some fascinating conversations about history that I wanted to join in yesterday and couldn't. So perhaps we can pick those up another time. But my role in all of this is that I've worked in the playwork field for around 30 years now. I developed something called the PARS model of playwork practice for my PhD. And the PARS model was supposed to be a conceptual model of practice. So I went back into the history of playwork, right back to the adventure playgrounds set up in the Second World War in the UK. And I looked at how were they describing their practice? What were they saying that they were doing? But more importantly, why were they doing it that way? Because in playwork, we've always had this idea that we're different from other approaches to working with children, but actually articulating that, describing that, demonstrating the value of that has been a real barrier, and the inability to do those things has been a real barrier to us progressing as a recognised profession, both here and now internationally across the world. So I went back to the adventure playground literature to find out if they had a better way of describing what they were doing than we did in the contemporary playwork field. And it was a fascinating journey, which ended up building this conceptual model of playwork practice. What then happened to that was it was supposed to sit in a PhD and never be used. But I was working in Hong Kong at the time, delivering playwork training, and actually people started to use it. And so now this is an approach which is being used in lots of different countries in the world, much to my surprise. The darn thing seems to work. So we're developing an organisation, I guess, and practitioners and trainers around the world to see how this approach to working with children works and what we can do about that. So my part in this today is I'm just going to give you a very brief history of where this approach to working with children came from. And as my trainers know, I can run on about this for hours. So I am going to try and be very, very, very brief. So sorry if there's some details left out, but hopefully we can draw on those questions later. I would ask, please, for please don't take copies of the slides, and that's because we have permission to use these photographs, but we haven't got permission to make them widely available. So if you please don't take copies of the slides. So I'm going to give a very brief history, and then Karen and Susan and Rebecca are going to talk about how this PARS playwork approach to working with children works in practice. They're going to be the more interesting bit. So I'll do mine quickly. So playwork really started in the adventure playgrounds set up just after the Second World War. Now, playwork as an approach to working with children started in the UK because we had a great body of people working in these adventure playgrounds who were interested in how to describe their different approach to working with children. But the actual idea of adventure playgrounds themselves started in Denmark. And this is one of my favourite possessions. It's a picture by of Emdrup, which is the first adventure playground in Denmark. And if you can see here, I don't know if you can see, this is of course only a picture. It's a snapshot, it's a moment of time. But the thing I love about this picture is it just typifies a playwork approach to working with children. Here's our one visible adult, and all she's doing is standing, observing with her hands behind her back. And there was a very good reason for that I'm just going to describe now. Sorensen was a landscape architect, and he was interested in, or he was involved in moving rural populations out of towns, out of rural areas and into towns and cities, new build towns and cities. But one of the things that he talked about in a book in 1931 was the idea that actually these towns and cities have been designed for adults. And the trouble was that when kids were living in the rural areas, they would go off by themselves, do their own thing for hours on end. And there would be no helpful adults around to say, oh, stop doing that. Don't dig that. Oh, could you do it this way? Because that would be better. Stop using that and use it properly. And he said, actually, when kids were out and by themselves, they developed their own ideas. They did things on their own terms. They came up with their own solutions. And now we've moved them into these new build towns and cities. They basically can't get away from the helpful adults or the interfering adults who decide that actually they've got more right to tell children how to spend their own time than the children have. So he was very much for creating time and space for kids to do things on their own terms, and he out of the way of this, out of the way of these sort of adults, these nosy interfering adults. So he came up with this idea called the Skrammelgeplads. In Danish, Skraml is junk, Liga is play, and Geplads is place. And originally these places were simply places where children went to play with junk or went to do stuff with junk. They built, they made fires, they did all sorts of stuff on their own terms and from their own perspectives. Lovely Lady Ellen of Hertwood. If you've never heard of her, look her up on YouTube. She's fantastic. I could talk about her for hours. She was instrumental in the UK in the 1948 Children Act. She was very interested in the war. She was a pacifist. She was very interested in the plight of children at that time. And so she became involved in lots and lots of different children's organisations and set a lot up. She was also a landscape architect by professional training, interestingly enough. She visited Emdrup in the 1940s and saw this as a solution to a problem that she had always felt. Interestingly, she was also a pupil of Bedale's in her youth and had a very happy childhood there. And she had this very clear idea about what childhood should be like. And she saw children getting a very raw deal. And she wanted to do something about that. It's one of my favourite Lady Ellen quotes. I don't particularly care for children, as a matter of fact, but I hate injustice, always have. And she wrote an article in the Picture Post, which was a popular magazine at the time in the UK, and called "Why Not Use Our Bomb Sites Like This?" And she saw an opportunity to import this idea of a Skrammelgeplads, later called adventure playgrounds, into the UK for kids to do their own thing on their own terms. That idea was then popularised by that article. And so what happened was a lot of people read that article in the Picture Post and they just set up adventure playgrounds in their own neck of the woods, in their own areas. And I've met some of those people who were involved in those very early days. And I said, so did you meet Lady Ellen? What was she like? And they all just looked at me and said, no, dear, we read the Picture Post and we jolly well got on with it. And these places just sprang up all around the UK. Now, adventure playgrounds are often characterised as playgrounds, but actually for the adventure playground pioneers, they had a much bigger vision which related to justice, and particularly social justice for children. In terms of adults had time and space to do what matters to them. They had leisure time that they could direct at their own will on their own terms. But when children tried to do that, often what happened was that the adults got involved, they interfered, they tried to organise, they tried to structure, they tried to correct. And the adventure playgrounds said, the pioneers said, hang on a minute, that isn't fair. We need space where kids can be kids and do their own thing on their own terms. So for the adventure playground pioneers, play was very much the business of children themselves, because what they realised was that exactly like a colleague yesterday talked about the stairs. I don't know, somebody from Germany, and I can't remember his name, but he described how when children were told to go up the stairs, when there was an adult watching, they did it properly and they could perform this task. They went up the stairs, they held the railing. Actually, when the adults stopped watching them, then the children did it their own way completely. They crawled up the stairs, they hopped up the stairs, they went backwards up the stairs on their bottoms. And this was exactly where the Adventure Playground pioneers were coming from. Because what they talked about was that children are different to adults. They have different needs, they have different perspective, they have different knowledge. And actually, as an adult-led society, we do not provide for that, or we do not recognize it, we don't acknowledge it enough, and then we don't actively cater for that in our adult-ruled world. And the way that the Adventure Playground pioneers saw children was characteristically very different to adults. So they saw adults as structured and organized and planned, whereas they saw children as very much alive in the moment, needing excitement and novelty, engaged for happiness, curious, creative human beings. Now, of course, we know that actually that's not true of all human beings. Not all children are like that. Not all children enjoy dirt. Not all adults are structured and programmed. But as a general, and that's why in our PARS model, this is a philosophy. It's the philosophy that underpins it. It's an approach. It's a way of being and a way of seeing the world. And the Adventure Playground pioneers saw that that was a problem, because for them that there were two distinct groups of human beings, children and adults, different needs, different priorities, different perspectives, different knowledge. But the problem was that adults were dominant, and the adults pretty much always had their way just by dint of the fact that they were adults. And so the Adventure Playground pioneers were not really interested in play as such. What they were interested in was, where do children get time and space to do things from their own childish, in the positive sense of the word? It's often used in a negative sense of the word, isn't it? It's not good. Where do children get the time and space to do things from their own perspective, on their own terms? And Adventure Playgrounds were created on that basis. It was really difficult to find a way of describing this when I did my PhD, and I found this concept of a modern philosopher, Professor John Wall at Rutgers in America, and he talks about childism, which he defines as taking the perspective of the experiences and concerns of childhood. And so our approach to working with children in the PARS model is we would describe it as a childist approach, that we are trying to compensate children for the presence of adults in their time and space by avoiding adulteration wherever possible. Because in lots of different places around the world, children, for whatever reason, are not able to be free by themselves without adult supervision. So the question for us is, where children do have to spend time in supervised settings, how can those adults recognize the different needs and perspectives of children without necessarily taking those over all the time from an adult perspective? And this idea of adulteration in PARS is defined as the prioritization of adult ideas and concerns over children's ideas and concerns. The challenge for us is, of course, that sometimes children's experience does need to be adulterated, and sometimes children want their experience or their time to be adulterated. Sometimes children need help, sometimes they need support. Sometimes there's safety concerns. So the question for us as PARS practitioners is, when does adult presence or intervention become, when is that helpful to the child? When is it necessary? Or when does it become unnecessary adulteration and simply imposing that adult view? on children's time and space. So that's what the model does. It helps adults to make that decision about, if I'm going to do this, what does that mean in terms of the child's experience? Is that necessary adulteration? And maybe sometimes that has to happen for safety reasons, for example. Or is that unnecessary adulteration? Am I just putting in my own adult 2 pennyworth and actually it's not relevant or it's not helpful to the child here? And our aim is to help children to have their own time and space as much as possible. So I just need to butt out. And that's what the model does. It helps practitioners to make those decisions, and then it helps them to explain them. Because one of the issues we've had in the playwork field for 70 years is we haven't had a professional or technical language. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to Karen in Shanghai, who's going to tell you about how that works in practice from a Chinese point of view. Oh, do I need to stop sharing? Sorry, Karen, I'm going to throw you out.
Hello.
There you go.
Okay, let me try to share my screen. Okay. Hi, my name is Karen, and I'm leading the PARS training team in Shanghai, China. And I first met Shelley in 2015 in Hong Kong in a playwork training, and I was so inspired by her at that time, and I decided to bring the PARS playwork approach to China, because in China, like also in other East Asia countries, children are in big pressure of education and study. Although people are aware of the importance of children's free play, when in practice, adults usually think that play with no purpose is a kind of waste of time. And nowadays, at least in China, there are many social problems with children due to lack of time and space for them to play freely. So I became probably the first play worker in China. In late 2017, we did the first PARS masterclass in Shanghai. It was delivered by Shelley, and I think you can easily find her in the pictures. It was very successful training, and it gave me confidence to bring this new concept in China. So I started to translate all the training materials into Chinese, into Mandarin, to deliver the tailor-made courses to the social workers, to parents, and even to kindergarten teachers. In 2018 and 2019, I delivered many trainings for kindergarten teachers in rural areas, in Guangxi province, in Hubei province, and here's a pictures that is me with the kindergarten teachers. And I also help them to design their play date and help them to design the play time into their daily schedule. And in the kindergartens with big open space, outdoor space, you can see that children, they bring the loose parts, they bring these play materials, and also the teachers collect the materials from their parents, so they start their play day. And if some kindergarten do not have open space or outdoor space, they will rent a local taekwondo indoor space during the daytime, because in the daytime the taekwondo steps do not have students. So in the daytime, the children come to the kindergarten children come to the taekwondo space, and they play freely in this space. And I always like to share this feedback from the kindergarten teachers. One teacher told me that she was worried whether children have the ability to handle risks and whether they knew how to play with the play materials. Now I have confidence in them. They can think of their own ways to play, and they're really creative. The children, they do know how to avoid the danger and to help themselves. So the teachers, after the trainings, they start to have the confidence not only in children, but also in themselves to deliver this play work practice in their kindergarten. And I also like the second feedback very much. The teacher told me that those children who cried every morning and were not willing to come to school start to love kindergarten, because in that kindergarten they have the free play early in the morning. As soon as children come to the kindergarten, the whole kindergarten come together onto the playground and play. And also some teachers feedback to me that when parents do not understand why we just let children play, now I know how to explain to them. I think it's mainly because in our PARS training, we not only provide them the skills, the techniques, also we require them to know how to articulate, how to explain this concept to others. And luckily, in early this year, we had our first adventure playground in North Shanghai. It's still a very mini one, and the space does not belong to us. We cooperate with a community garden, but at least it's a permanent one now. And children can come to play in winter and summer holiday, and at weekends. They build, they play, and also they still have to pay to come. But at weekdays, the children in the communities, they just can come to this playground and to play with the materials that left by the children at the weekends. Here are some pictures. And we are also doing the project called Play in My Neighborhood. It's sponsored by local government, which is really very hard for us to gain this sponsorship from the government. These are the pictures that is our first Play in My Neighborhood neighborhood project, and it was in the city center of Shanghai, because I do think that children should come to play in their walking distance, so they just walk downstairs and so they can play. And very soon in late October, we will have our second community to have this kind of play space. Okay, that's what we are doing here in Shanghai, China. Okay.
Thanks, Karen. And Susan, I think we've got a couple of minutes, I think. So Susan's been involved in a PARS training project in higher education in well, she'll tell you where it was, Bucknell University. And so, yeah, different approach.
Yes, hello. I'll be run through this very quickly. This approach is really looking at advancing the professionalism of play, which matches up so well with Shelley's model, and moving this training into higher education so that pre-service teachers will emerge from their teacher training and understand the value of play. So I feel like I fell into my knowing Shelley and her work pretty serendipitously through another professor. I'm in Pennsylvania in the United States. This other professor, Jonathan McLeod, knew Shelley, and through Jonathan and Shelley, we brought PARS training to a group of students who were involved in a practicum that was also a course requirement last semester during COVID, when they were not otherwise able to be with children in the school setting. We were able to create a forest school outside that was very play-based, very focused on social and emotional learning. And as a component of that, we brought the PARS play model to this group of university students so that they could better understand the value of play, and more specifically, the role of the adult, which, as we all experience, is so uncharacteristic of our traditional way of interacting with children. So the first exposure has got to be for pre-service teachers. The program that we developed included Shelley's training. I think we had the 6-hour model. And then we were able to immediately apply that to our work with children outside in forest school, which Shelley has described as play work in the woods. And I'll just share a few photographs of what that looked like for these students. It involved lecture, of course, and conversation, but also weekly meetings evaluating our observations. And here are some of the pictures of the university students playing with children in a way that they had never experienced before. Lots of loose parts in the first one, very open-ended play, lots of risk involved. There was very enthusiastic, adventurous sledding where the pre-service teachers were really challenged to think differently about whether they were going to intervene, interact, or contain themselves. We were applying Shelley's principles directly to what we were doing in our practical experience. There was lots of climbing, and I want to draw your attention to this picture on the right because it reminds me very much of the picture that Shelley just showed of the first adventure playground in Denmark, where the play worker down here is just standing nearby while there's a child doing something maybe slightly risky, but this is one of the university students, and she's not challenging that child to get down. She's just there for support if needed, but she's letting the child experience that kind of play and that kind of physical risk and all the mental capacity that's needed to be able to be safe up at that height. You know, we were able to use other model or other elements of the PARS model, play theories such as environmental modification, putting out just a bit of a fairy house and then seeing how it develops. The children kept adding to it, so all the pre-service teachers got to see this kind of play, which was unlike anything they had ever experienced before in their teacher training or perhaps in their own childhood. The children started adding bits and pieces of snacks and leaves and flowers and feathers. They built out the other side. There was also one quick story, this muddy day, we had just learned about the play cycle. And Shelley was able to coach us through some difficulties we were having with one particular child. And she made some really concrete suggestions for us to figure out where this child was in the play cycle. We put those methods into practice 2 days later after we learned them from Shelley, and we saw a dramatic change in this child's behavior, who was previously pushing children and becoming very agitated, and learning the elements of play theories and our role in interacting with children. We were able to make a direct impact on how children were interacting with others. And it was a very, very powerful experience to combine the PARS model with our practicum. So just last slide to move through quickly. I know we're short on time. It's just in the picture on the right, you can see children pretty high up in the tree. I feel like that's symbolic of where we came as a group, as my role as a intern supervisor and a practitioner working with this group of university students. We all rose to new heights in terms of understanding that play is a profession, that partnering with Shelley and her model helps us to really support play as a pro-child profession. And I'm excited where this is going to go next, and very grateful to Shelley for bringing this to us in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. That's fabulous. I hadn't seen some of those photos before. That was lovely. Thank you. Brilliant. I think we're probably out of time. Are we, Carter? Have we basically outstayed our welcome?
Yes, I'm really sorry. I wish you could stay for like whole day.
No, I'm sorry.
Let's hope in the in-person festival you can show us how it is done really in practice.
That's fine. Rebecca and I were just messaging and saying, oops, I think we're out of time. So sorry about that. There's more information on the screen for anybody who wants it. Thanks to everybody for coming, listening, and yeah, see you next year. Looking forward to it hugely.
Yeah, us too.